We parked the car at the Sand Haven, a large angled green at the north end of Culross. To the right is the old town hall with its clock tower. Then we have a couple of old buildings with crow-stepped gables that used to be harbour warehouses, a sign of the trade with the Low Countries, and to complete the scene, the ochre-coloured Culross Palace. In the middle of the square was the Tron, where the export cargoes were weighed prior to being loaded onto waiting boats. Culross must come as a pleasant surprise to the casual visitor following the Fife tourist route. It sits between the Longannet power station to the north, the now disused salt pans to the south, and directly across from the massive oil refinery at Grangemouth. At the far end of the Sand Haven is the striking Culross Palace, built around 1600 as a home for the wealthy landowner, George Bruce, built from the proceeds of his local business ventures. Culross, in the time of George Bruce, was a very prosperous village, but gradually its industries went into decline. While the other villages adapted, Culross stood still, becoming a bit of a dilapidated backwater. Then in stepped the National Trust to buy the palace in 1932 and to renovate it, and by 1940 they owned another 20 buildings, including the study. The view back towards the Sand Haven gives a wonderful impression of how the village used to look. The narrow winding cobbled lanes, the outer staircases and the tall rendered buildings leading onto the open square, as if it were frozen in time. Culross looks as if it has been unaltered since the 16th century. The cars dotted around the narrow little winds tend to spoil things a bit, but what can you say? Here the past merges with the present. Culross is occupied by modern people living modern lives. I remember receiving a book from my parents in the early 60s, a book in Scottish scenery, and I noticed a wonderful picture of Culross Palace, then reduced to its bare stone, but it still looked dramatic. It was that picture that drew me to discover this wonderful spot. Back in the Sand Haven, Roberta had found a pottery. Luckily, by now it was closed. In a corner of the lane, old mill wheels were used as planters. Immediately to the right we came to the back causeway, leading up to the left with its row of whitewashed houses, and overhead at the top of the little lane is the tall whitewashed building called the Study. The wynd opens out to a little square. Straight ahead is the Tanhouse Brae. This is a bit of a crossroads with 4 lanes leading off it. We decided to head on up the Tanhouse Brae. Many of the houses had inscriptions above the doors and windows. The house on the left is a cleaver steel with a date of 1664. It once belonged to a butcher. The last house on the left is a tan house, the house that the lane is named after. And on the right is the coachman's cottage. In the distance is a church tower, and from here on the lane is called Kirk Street, leading up to the church and the abbey ruins. The abbey ruins bear no resemblance to the one founded in 1217. The abbey has been altered significantly since the Reformation, and much of it has been used as a local quarry. Much of the stone from the abbey would have been used in the building of the manse in 1647. It's an atmospheric ruin just the same, still complete with its vaulted ceiling at various levels. The ruined stone pillars at the east corner give very little clue of what it used to look like. We headed back down Kirk Street. Just beyond the coachman's house, a little lane leads off to the right. About 10 yards along the lane, we find the Locket well. It used to have a pump handle, and the water poured out from a small pipe below it. On the way down, I stopped to read the inscription around the window of Snuff Cottage, a former snuff maker's house. In the distance, the Forth could be made out above the houses. Looking down to the small square below, the Mercat Cross, built in 1588, takes pride of place, and sitting behind it is the oldest house in Culross, 11 years older. It is thought that the building in the corner was once a seaman's hostel. We headed down the cobbled streets of the Wee Causeway. The building on our right is the nunnery. The main street through the village is the Low Causeway, where we called into the village inn for a meal. At its junction with the Mid Causeway sits a wonderful little cottage containing an electricity substation, built in this way to preserve as much of the village character as possible. This is probably the most picturesque house in the whole village. The Mid Causeway typifies everything that makes Culross what it is. The cobbled streets, the wonderful old whitewashed houses. It leads to the market square, as do the other two wynds. Indeed, everything radiates from the market square like the spokes of a wheel, each leading to the main points of interest in the village: the church, the post office, the inn, the town hall, and the palace. This former derelict, rotting old borough is now a desirable residential village, almost a museum, a relic of another time.